This week, fans of Todd Phillips' The Joker, a movie about an imaginary character coincidentally named after a costume similar to DC Comics' The Joker, were thoroughly disappointed at the sequel, a film about as much like the original as the original was about the source material. Both movies are distinctly weird, if not very well shot and very cool looking movies about a serial killer's rise to prominence, their arrest, downfall, trial, and they'd be decent movies. They weren't supposed to be about the Joker, but as they are, the sequel is absolutely frickin' bonkers. I'm Dan Umpton, and the Doomcast is back, baby. Alright, first off, do me a favor, hit subscribe and the bell. I make about one of these videos a week. They're all great, and yeah, I don't want you to miss any of them. The first Joker was a fine film. I know a lot of people thought it was a cinematic masterpiece. It was a really cool looking movie, but it was such a departure from the characterization of Joker in comics or in other media that it was a little jarring, but I was fine with it. Doing the Joker without Batman is about as fulfilling as Venom without Spider-Man, which, yes, I know they've made 3 of those movies as well. They still kind of work to a certain degree, but there's also a point at which you have to acknowledge that they're emanations of and dependent on that other character. Before we go farther, I suppose I should mention there are spoilers here. You actually should see the movie, I think, but if you don't care, then whatever, continue to watch. The first Joker worked in appealing to a broad dissatisfaction by average working class people who think they or their parents were ever part of the middle class, who have spent their lives in increasingly eclipsing social mobility, especially young men for whom rejection has become automated and commodified in the form of online job applications and dating apps, a whole generation for whom the social contract is disintegrated, and it's very empowering to see chaos adopted as a persona in retaliation to abuses that you perceive yourself to share in some like, kind, or degree. So a new social contract was formed in that, hey, if we see this Joker again, he should be similarly powerful and revolutionary in the degree that we saw him in the first movie. The direction in which Todd Phillips took that, however, was to make a musical in which Lee Quinzel, the Harley Quinn, manipulates and exploits Arthur Fleck during his trial before killing herself, or maybe only thinking about killing herself, and in which Arthur is sexually assaulted by cops in prison before recanting his entire persona and his legal defense of insanity to his incredible detriment. In other words, a total subversion of the audience's expectations based on the first film. Bear in mind, that's not a bad thing to do in cinema, but the original film didn't appeal to people who are particularly comfortable with nuance in most cases. This would be a pretty good and interesting film if it was called Arthur Fleck 2, the sequel to Arthur Fleck, and it was just about a weird serial killer who gained a cult following and then lost it, only to be murdered by a psychopath, sorry, spoilers, who presumably adopts his Joker persona, but unfortunately, this was about the Joker, and it's a comic book movie, and the audience felt pretty betrayed. Now, for me, however, this was really the only direction that this could have actually gone as a sequel to the first movie after the events of the first film, if we're imagining a Gotham without Batman, or at least before Batman. But I think the target audience, which was definitely the people who liked the first movie, wanted more of the first movie. Taking a character that made them feel vicariously empowered, regardless of whether they should identify with a villain or not. Having that character beaten, tortured, and sexually assaulted is a huge subversion of their expectations, and one they could predictably only read as a betrayal. Nonetheless, this movie did hold my attention the entire time, more than a lot of other comic book movies that have been better reviewed and better rated, because I had no idea where this was going to go. However, I do have a theory that on some level Todd Phillips pulled what's essentially a joke on the audience, and that this film is the punchline. The first film was the setup. He built a Joker character that would be idolized by exactly the kind of people that like the Joker as a character to begin with, and then in the second film portrayed this violent agent of chaos who builds a violent movement against a social safety net and government that completely failed him and countless other people, just indiscriminately murdering other people, including Murray Franklin. Then in the second film, the punchline, show him break down, recognize that he isn't anyone particularly special. What he did had no direction other than chaotic violence, which in turn ended up directed at him after he lost his sycophants. In the same way, this kind of thing happens to other historical figures in real life, like Mussolini or George Lincoln Rockwell. But here he gets stabbed to death by what we can only surmise is a canonical Joker, an anonymous psychopath who is just chaos embodied, which frankly is exactly who the Joker should be. But that version of the Joker is really only interesting in the context of Batman anyway, and you can't tell a good origin story about that guy. This is the only story that you can really tell. What's especially funny is that this is the very last of the DC film universe until Gunn's Superman Legacy, and this might actually be enough to push things over the edge and turn the public on superhero fare. And I say this because I also see that major movie studios are now planning on focus testing movies from their earliest stages, even after writing anything that's franchise adapted, to see if fans will turn on it and have this panel of superfans tell them what they should do next or not do. That's terrifying to me, because instead of having a director and writer with an actual creative vision, people who know what they're doing, that tell me a good and new story that I haven't seen, instead what you're going to get is the same thing that happened when they tried that already with Rise of the Skywalker and Ant-Man Quantumania. Remember how that turned out. I think what you need to do is just focus on telling a good story with people who are already fans of the material to begin with, and maybe, just maybe, see if they're able to put something together that's fresh and new and actually engages people. You know, kind of like Marvel did around 2008 to about 2018. I mean, I think there's always going to be some people who are going to keep watching those, but I don't know if superhero movies are going to be anything studios can bank on future forward. Will the Joker, the one who wanted to burn it all down, actually succeed after being made into a joke themselves? Knock knock. Who's there? Comic book movie. Comic book movie who?